So let's start. I'm happy to welcome here and introduce Alfons Fürst, and he will be our first speaker in our series on letters. And well, he is from Regensburg in South Bavaria, but now he's in northern Germany in Münster. And of course, he's well known for his research on origin and as the editor of the series Adamantiana, for example. But also he was visiting scholar in Princeton and Berkeley. But besides origin, he has also a research topic on late antique epistolography. And probably you know his work on the exchange of letters between Augustine and Jerome, for example. But he also published on the apocryphal letters of Paul and Seneca, which I like very much, these conversation between those two. And so this is the reason and background why we asked him to give a general introduction, and his topic will be now on research on letter writing in the past 100 years. So the floor is yours, Alfons.
Thank you very much, Uta, and welcome to everybody in this virtual room. Samuel asked me quite late whether I could participate, and I told him, okay, I can do something in a more general way, not something specific now to Nicaea and the Arian crisis and so on, but this can be interesting as a general introduction into letters. So I'm working on this topic now again since 2 years, I guess, related to other publications. Some people here present know what I mean. A handbook on letter writing in Antiquity, and there will be a new series. And just today, I sent the last version of the first volume of this new series to the publisher. And the series is called Epistula. Simply Epistula. We were quite surprised that this title was still free, so we could use it. And it's about letters and paideia. So how you might translate paideia in your languages is up to you. So all know what I mean by paideia. So this is my background why I dealt a lot with letters in the last years. So my first remark in a general way would be, if we look at letter writing in antiquity, then it's quite astonishing how many letters we have from late antiquity. So much more, really, the bulk of letters is from late antiquity. Of course, we have other letters as well, and in papyri, there are thousands, 10,000s of letters from daily concerns, but actually we have the most preserved letter corpora and letters from late antiquity and from Christian late antiquity. This might, of course, be due to the process of transmission of these letters. Of course, the Christians were interested in transfer the letters of Basil the Great, of the Gregories, of Augustine, Jerome, and so on. But it's also due to the community of the Christian churches. And I think it's not wrong to describe this Christian community as a community of letter writers. It starts with letters. The letters of Paul are the first written Christian documents we have. And then you can go on and see that we have here an ongoing exchange of letters between communities in the beginning, and then mostly between the bishops of these communities, but also other people in the monasteries, the monks, and so on. And this communication produced a constant flow of letters going from here to there in the whole Roman Empire, actually, and beyond. So also in the Eastern and other parts of this world, in the Syriac world, and so on. So this is a specific of Christianity, and this has some consequences. One which, in my view, is interesting is the following. If we look at the style of these letters and how they are set up and so on, then they do not differ from non-Christian letters, from ancient letter writing. You have basically the same formulas of greetings, of salutations in the end, and so on, of formal addresses, how they talk to each other, and so on. This is basically the same. And you can see this in research on that. So people who are interested in the style of letter writing, in genres, in questions of topics, or so like letter is an expression of friendship, and it's a communication between people who are not at the same place, and so on. Then people who do research on that, they usually take into account ancient letters as well as Christian letters. And if you look at the theoretical ideas they have in these letters, for instance, one famous letter from Gregory of Nazianzen, letter 51, he has basically the same theory that you can find in ancient theories like the Pseudo-Libanius Epistolimae Characteres. And maybe Gregory has taken his theory from this letter theorist. The only difference you might find is that they use some biblical formulas in the address or something like that. So inspired by Paul and so on. That could create a kind of difference. But that's the only thing. It's basically identical. Where we find, in my view, a bigger difference, and this sounds quite simple now, but it has also consequences, is the length of letters. So a rule for letter writing in Antiquity is generally that a letter should be short. Brevitas epistulae. That's an ideal. And if you look at many letters, then you can see this. Letters are usually 1 page, 2 pages. If you look at these many thousands of papyri and so on, short letters just used for daily communication, and other letters as well. Plinius, I will come back to him again, his letters are quite short letters usually. There are some exceptions, but they are not long. They are what we would think of a letter. We write something on 1 or 2 pages, maybe 3 or 4, but that's it. There are still some exceptions in Antiquity that some guys start writing longer letters, sometimes quite long letters. And the first one who does this, we know for sure, is Epicurus. In these 3 letters we have from Epicurus to Menoikeus, to Herodotus, and so on. These are letters of education or philosophical training. So he uses them as introduction into his philosophy. And of course, when you think about this content, then it's nearly natural. Now this letter becomes a bit longer. You need a bit more space to develop your introduction in a complicated philosophical matter. And so you can see this then in other letters as well, some very long letters in Seneca. Seneca's Epistolae Morales in the beginning are very short, and then they get longer and longer, and in the second part of this corpus, when he comes to the theoretical things, then we have long letters. And if you look now into Christianity, let's start with Paul. He already begins with writing longer letters. No, we have a very small one, so 1 sheet letter, so to say, the letter to Philemon. This is a kind of private letter in a sense, so what we think a letter should be. But when you look at the letter to Romans, it's quite long, and he has to develop his long and complicated argument to come to his point or to make his point. And this is the beginning of Christian letter writing. And when you now look into what we have, and I'm sure that you all know a lot of Christian letters, many of them are very long letters. The First Clement, the so-called letter of First Clement, is already very long. Then the first corpus we really have from Cyprian, with quite long letters sometimes. And then if you can end up, maybe the best example is Augustine. Many of his letters are whole books, and you cannot decide, is it a letter or is it a book? And Augustine's own definition of a letter is simply, if in the beginning is written who writes to whom, then it's a letter. No question how long it might be in the end. And the reason for that is that the Christians, in my view, have new contents to deal with. And there are basically two new contents in the ancient world. The first is the Bible, and the second is the creed, so to say, to make a complicated thing short. So discussions about creeds, about Christian belief, and so on. And if we look at these letters, and mostly at these long letters, then they mostly deal with exegesis, with biblical questions, and with theological questions about Trinitarian things, other things, or related maybe more to practical life in the church, so letters about penitence, about baptism, and so on. And this creates a new way to use this genre. It's really used as a way of communication, but it's an official communication. So it's like a way of publishing your communication. It's always an open dialogue between the one who writes, between the letter writer and the addressees. So mostly these people are not private letters in the sense we think about a private letter, that it's only a matter between the two correspondents. But they are aware that from the beginning, these letters are read by other people as well. And they know that, and they write it with this in mind. So they use this genre of letter writing as their main medium of discussion. And this, you have the same because this is a special era in between monastic communities, when they talk about monastic spirituality and ascetic practices and behavior and so on. And this is the same also in pseudepigraphic letter writing. So whether it's authentic or not, the content and all these mechanisms work in the same way. One consequence is that sometimes we cannot distinguish between a letter and a book or a treatise, and sometimes they call their products at the one place they call it a letter, and the next place Augustine says it's a treatise. So it's not, this boundary is not clear enough. And the advantage of using this medium for discussion is that it has a concrete addressee. So if you write a treatise, and some of these letters are treatises, you can do it as well, and then it's more neutral, because it's not addressing you to whom you speak. So, and then you develop your thoughts in a more, as we would see it, more academic manner. But if you write a letter, then you have a real addressee in mind. And he is directly questioned. He can be asked in a way. You have specific topics or theses or hypotheses maybe coming from your correspondent, and then it's a kind of more vital exchange of arguments and ideas. And every reader of such a letter is able to take on the role of the addressee. So it's written to somebody, but it's addressed actually to every single reader who might come across this letter. Many of Jerome's letters are written precisely in this way. So the addressee is basically the first person which is honored by the dedication of this written text to him. That's the idea then of letter writing, but actually it's a statement for an open community, so to say. And I think this is one reason why we have so many letters also in these theological discussions around Nicaea and other councils and so on. I might be wrong now, so Samuel knows best now. I think he can correct me. But my impression is that most things we know about a council like Nicaea, because we have no acts, is of course in later historians, but that's not the point, is in letters. So these documents around this event are mainly letters. And this is not by chance, but because of this background in the Christian community, that they are always communicating in this way and discussing their ideas. And maybe a last point on that. What we can see more in late antiquity as well than in previous centuries of ancient times are letter collections. So the first letter collection published by the author himself is this famous collection of the letter of Pliny the Younger. And it's fully preserved. We have these 10 books and so on, 9 books, and the last one, the 10th book, with his letter exchange with the emperor, with Trajan. Very famous in all parts. As I have seen it in the handbook we prepared. I would say many letter corpora are understudied. This Pliny correspondence seems to be overstudied. There are so many publications on that, you cannot believe it. Because it's the first collection we have where we find all these rules and mechanisms going on in these collections. And Pliny styled it deliberately to show to an open audience, his network in higher Roman society up to the emperor. So the last book is, so to say, the peak of all that, his communication with the emperor. And we have other collections then as well, but from Cicero, for instance, it's done later, after his death. But when we can really see many of these collections is late antiquity. And now it's an interesting difference here, which I realized recently. There are not so many collections in Greek patristics. So basically, it's Gregory of Nazianzen who published his his letters in a deliberately styled collection, and mostly shorter letters. But where we can see many of these collections is in Latin, so in the Latin parts, starting with Jerome, who published some of his collections. It's not the collection we have now. This is arranged by the Moorists, like all other collections we have in Minia and in modern editions. They had the idea to publish them in chronological way, but that's not the order they were originally published and not the order in the manuscripts. So it's a construct and sometimes not very reliable. So, for instance, the letters of Basil the Great are not easy to date. So it's very hard to find a chronological series on that. So, but it starts with Jerome, and then we have many other collections deliberately styled, sometimes according the collection of Pliny the Younger. So it was a kind of matrix how to do that. And then you can see it at best in Ambrose. He has also his 10 books, and they are exactly in the way as Pliny did it, and the 10th are the official letters, the political ones, and the others are dealing with other questions, mostly exegetical questions, and then in late antiquity in Gaul. And this is a trend now also in research, so that basically my impression is that you can order the research of the last 100 years, that it started with using the letters as more reliable source to write a biography of these guys. And then with the idea that you get closer to the real guy. And then it's used as a kind of authentic evidence for that. We know now that this is very tricky because of these deliberately styled letter writing and the corpora style and so on. So they present themselves as they want to be seen. And now we look at them and see them as they want to be seen. So then it moved to some publications dealing more with these topical things, with genres, with questions of addressing and titles in letter writing, and so on. There is quite a lot of literature on that, so how they do this. And then we had a phase or a period mostly coming from historians, sometimes philologists. They looked at these letters as documents for networks, so social networks and networking between bishops, Christian churches, communities, and so on. And there are some studies on all these different corpora, on Jerome, on Paulinus of Nola, on Basil the Great, and so on, using this idea of network constructing. And the last idea present in this American handbook on ancient letter corpora is to study these corpora as corpora, so as deliberately styled presentations of these guys. And then you can ask the question why they do it so often in late antiquity, in the 4th and 5th, maybe 6th century in early medieval Gaul and so on, late antique Gaul. And this is a question not easy to answer. So it might be that they felt the need to present their multiple relationships and their network and their, and it's presenting their education, their knowledge of Bible, their the scholarship in philosophical matters, in theological things, and so on. And in some way, they felt a need to present this to the public by deliberately styling a corpus of their letters. So this is a phenomenon of really fourth, fifth centuries. So these were my more general introductory thoughts, which might be interesting for a common background when you're now going to more closer to the letters written around the Council of Nicaea. Thanks for your patience.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alfons, for this general introduction and your observations. I think they are very interesting, and even your observation about the difference in Latin and Greek realm, it's interesting. I've never thought about this in detail, actually. Yeah, so we are really missing some letter collections in the Greek. We would be happy to have this.
No, we have one, but they are done later by people who gathered them, and then in the transmission of manuscripts. And of course, we have Libanius and others. But I never thought about it myself. I just realized it when working on this material, and then I saw it's all in Latin. So mostly all. That's a phenomenon.
Yeah. Well, one could interpret this as the effect of typical Latin bureaucracy in the private life. But, well, are there some questions to Alfons Fürst before we continue and have a more general discussion? Samuel, do you have a question, or am I wrong?
Yes, I will. Well, thank you very much, Alfons, for your presentation. It was really insightful. My question is about like the so to say the ecclesiological aspect of this huge number of letters, and then obviously the sense of unity, of the different communities which are here and there and so on. And then what do you think that we can learn from this observation of yours, that is the huge number of Christian letters, about the self-understanding, the self-identity of these communities, which need to be communicated, so to say?
That's a big question. only one aspect on that, which is might be worth of thinking. We have learned now for some generations to look at the diversity of early Christianity. So, and that we more and more should be aware of these many different groups, and not in terms of orthodoxy and heresy, but just of difference and variety and so on, and not to make any broader perspective on that, but to regionalize our research, so that we only can say, okay, in this region we have this, and in another region we have different style, and so on. And this is very correct, because that's the reality of early Christianity. And against this backdrop, I think it's really interesting, and this is my answer now to your question about the self-understanding, that they obviously had a kind of sense that they belong together, at least in certain subdivisions, so to say. No, it's of course some groups were always outside it as heretics and so on, but we have obviously from the beginning a sense that in some way they are one community. They have this idea of unity, which is contra-intuitive, so to say. Is this an English word? So if you look at the reality, then you realize many different ideas and people, like now. It's, you have divergences and variety or multiplicity all over the world. But nevertheless, they have this sense, in at least a big part and in different parts of that they belong to one community. And I think this letter exchanges is an expression of that they do that. And if they gather for a synod, they write a letter to those who were not there, so that all get involved in that and all get to know them. Ideas. And when the patriarch in Alexandria writes his synodal letters, then at the end you always find that he communicates, okay, this is the new bishop in this city, and so on, and now you know who can communicate with whom and who is within the communion of the church and who is not, and so on. So I think one part of this self-understanding is the idea to be a unity despite all these many divergent peculiarities.
Yeah, thank you. We have another question by David.
Yes, I'll make sure I'm not muted. Well, thank you very much, Alfons. I thought it was fascinating and very clear, very insightful talk. You sort of touched on this just now with some of the connections among churches or among bishops, but I was thinking of the fact that at least from the 4th century on, you have in the West letters from bishops of Rome that contain canons, for example. And well, we have Glenn Thompson here, who's an expert on that material, Julius and Liberius. So I was wondering where you see those disciplinary or canonical letters fitting into your work.
Yeah, thank you. It's a good question. I have not done research on that specifically. So my impression is from these letters, the style of letters starting with a bit with Damasus, but then later Siricius and so on, that this is it's a bit different from the other letters. It's more related to imperial habits or administrative habits of the Roman emperor and the Roman Empire. And it's taken over by the Roman bishop to write and organize. And now with Christian Hornung in Bonn, he did his PhD on this first letter of Siricius because it's the first letter styled according to these ideas and with these formulas and with the idea now to, not to discuss something, but to give orders. And he expects that they are followed. But I think this is it's a new turn in this genre, starting with Siricius actually, and then you have it in these official letters of the Roman bishop. That would be my tentative answer to that.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Peter, please.
Thank you very much for this fascinating introduction into the field of letter writing. Just one question to Greek collections of letters. So I have the pleasure to contribute something to the handbook of letters you're editing. And what do you say about Bartholomeus and John in the 6th century? These are 850 letters, and they were compiled consciously by a contemporary. And we could discuss Nilus of Ancyra, we could discuss Isidore of Pelusium. So I think there are some Greek letter collections. So do I understand you right? They don't really fit the model of Pliny or others, or what would you say?
No, I didn't want to say that there are none. There are some, and I only mentioned Gregory of Nazianzen because it's the most famous. But we have these others. So the comparison is that we have much more in the Latin West. That's the interesting thing. I don't know, I have to confess this now, actually about Isidore and Bartholomeus. Did they gather and publish their letters by themselves? So because that's the point. Is it on, so to say, an authorized edition, like Gregory, or has it been collected by others? And of course, and we have Basil. So I think people are there who know this better. So this would be the point. Did they publish a corpus of their letters, which must not be the same as we have now, to present themselves to a kind of public in their times? That's my point.
But just to Bartholomeus and John, as far as I know, the letters were collected immediately after their death, when they ceased to write. So it's not by themselves, but it's contemporary.
So like Basil, no? As far as we know, it was the same with Basil the Great. It was, for instance, no, Julian is not a Christian author in this sense. It was different with Julian. Of course, they were collected. And what we have now from Augustine's letters, he gathered them by himself in his archive in Hippo. And there is a discussion whether he published them or not. I'm not convinced that he published them by himself. But they were immediately gathered and published. And we know this because I'm working on the remains of Origen's letters. Eusebius gathered more than 100 letters of Origen in 13 books altogether, according to Jerome. So more than 100 letters. That's a huge letter collection. And they could read it in the 4th century. So they were interested in this kind of writing. And it's a big damage that this collection is lost. It would be very interesting to read all that, but it's gone. So, but there is another question here.
Yes, we have one expert on Isidore. Madalina, do you want to give into this?
So, if I can add something, thank you very much for your paper. Very, very interesting. I was also thinking about what you mentioned about the Greek collections and about them not having, in a sense, the same rationale behind as the Latin ones. And I don't know. So how do you put exactly a collection like Isidore's and even the Synesius? I would say I think there are traces of him gathering the letters, or Libanius. But okay, maybe if you don't consider Libanius part of the Christian letters, but I think you do have, even if you don't have a very clear structure about letters being gathered by the authors or a very specific mention on that, you do have traces of them collecting or keeping an archive and gathering them with the purpose of being later published in a sense. So I think this is what you also have with Isidore, and that's really a huge collection. So we have 2,000. Again, 2,000 is a very wrong number, but you have around 2,000 letters and published also fairly early, immediately after his death. So yeah, I suppose it depends how you define this agency, who did what and at what point, but I think things are can be a bit overlapping.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would agree. Yes, of course. We should not make such a big difference here then. Maybe it's also due to the fact that we can see it in these Latin collections later, that they are so explicitly styled according to a sample before. So it's Sidonius Apollinaris, for instance. He does it explicitly according to Pliny. So, and this is very, in a way, maybe a more idea of imitation or in the Latin world than we have in Greek. I don't know, but nevertheless, it's a topic we can think about. What is the idea behind their own their self-understanding as letter writers? So
Glenn Thompson, please. You have raised your hand.
Yes, thank you, Alfons. This was great. And I'd like to go back to the point you made about the no hard and fast boundary between the letter and the treatise. And I think a good example of that comes from Jerome, letters 19 and 20, for example, in the current numbering, where 20 is basically a treatise on the meaning, the Hebrew meaning of Hosanna, and he just uses the letter style in order to produce this treatise. And then I'm actually have wondered for a very long time whether Jerome didn't also then write letter 19, the very short invitation from Damasus to answer this question, and that's another possibility that this goes the next step and you actually write a letter that is going to give you the excuse for writing your treatise. Just a thought.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think Jerome is maybe the best example for this kind of styling himself as a letter writer. And if you combine this with the fact that, okay, these are early letters and he's still he's in the West, but 1920, no, he's in Antioch, but when he is in Bethlehem then, and his main partners are all in Rome and in the West, so he needs correspondence. So, and the idea, if no letter is coming with some question to you, then you just create it and then you write the answer to spread it in the Latin West, and it was read there. So Jerome is very productive in this way.
Well, I have a little question. So do you also have ideas to differentiate the different letter collections with respect if there are incorporated letters sent to one person? So not only the letters written by oneself. So this gives letter collections a completely different style if also the received letters are included or not, I think. Well, there are these collections very selfish styled, you mentioned, and well, with respect to Nicaea and the Trinitarian debate, we have also letter collections, but these are more than collections of documents to have material at hand, to have arguments for one's own position, or to be able to react on counter arguments, and to have all the material at hand to demonstrate, well, you have written this, but I can demonstrate that this is wrong, and so on. So this is a different kind of letter collection. So this is more documentary, and this is not only my letters, but everywhere else letters, which were just helpful to support one's own position.
Yes, this is a different kind, these documentary collections. In other collections, as far as I know it, my impression now is that mostly we don't have the letters of the addressees or the first letters with a question. So in Basil, for instance, it's very rare that we have really an exchange. Basically, we have his own letters. It's different in some famous cases, no, with this correspondence between Jerome and Augustine. You have both letters in both collections, in both archives. It's different with the letters between Jerome and Paulinus and Augustine and so on. But usually we have a one-sided dialogue, so to say. And I think this is mostly simply due to the archive. Now, what do you have in the archive? If you if an author is not thinking from the beginning to store his own letters in an archive, then it's sent to an author, and it's gone to an addressee, and then it's gone. If the addressee does not preserve or conserve it, then it's lost. So we know from Augustine that he had letters, copies from his own letters in his own archive. And so that's why we can have his later collection. It's the same with Jerome, but with many others, I think it's simply by chance. And if you look at the best overview I know is this old article, more than 200 columns of, now what's his name? Nicht Lagarde, that's, oh my goodness, where is it? Sorry, Leclerc. So,
Yeah.
and when you look at that, you cannot believe how many letters you can you can gather. But we know of much more we don't have. So anyway, we only have some of these huge production of letter writing.
Yeah, thank you, Alfons. If there are no further questions, I think we continue with the next presentation of Madalina Toca. She jumped already in with Isidore of Pelusium, and this is one of her research topics. And yeah, she's at the moment postdoc with me here in Vienna, but she studied in Romania and then at the CEU when this university was still based at Budapest. And she studied classical philology and medieval studies and completed a master thesis also in theology and religious studies, and went to Leuven. And there she started to work exactly on this corpus, this huge corpus of the letters, Isidore of Pelusium. But she had also in between a Celtic early career fellowship from the Royal Society in Edinburgh. And it's not only Isidore she's working with, she's also working on the Ignatians. So I really have the impression that letters is your favorite genre as well. So that's the reason why we are happy to have you here in our floor, and you will give us some information about practicalities. How did letters work in the context of Nicaea? So thank you that you have time and present something.
Well, thank you very much. And well, I also joined late the project, so this is a caveat I need to put up from the beginning. And I work mostly on epistolography on late antiquity, so a little bit of a different thing, but I was also very curious to look a little bit into this. So yeah, I'm going to speak about how letters work in the context of Nicaea. I have some slides, and I'm trying to share them. Yeah, can you see them? Can you see it? Okay. Okay. Well, first, I will start with some caveats and a terminological note about the very idea of letters in a conciliar context. When speaking about letters, it's difficult to differentiate between what represents a letter and what not, and it has been mentioned also before, given the often intertwined life of small independent texts within the conciliar collections, and these are canons, creeds, letters, attendance lists, and so on, petitions, and yeah. And well, just briefly, we have here a private letter from the 4th century from the Oxyrhynchus with instructions to be delivered to a bishop, Theodotus, and it's possibly Theodotus of Laodicea, and we don't have anything from him. So this might be actually the only fragment which mentions his name. So yeah, it's quite interesting. It's, I suppose, very difficult to demonstrate that this Theodotus is Laodicea, but I'll return to this a bit later. So yeah, so as we can see here from the Athanasius Werke, a lot of the literature here is actually letters in a letter format, and it has been mentioned before. But to give another example, starting from the fairly recent publication on creeds by Kinzig, many of these creeds and creedal formulae are scattered within letters and sometimes even constitute the largest and most important part of them. So it's really very difficult sometimes to differentiate between genres, and it depends what focus you have, then you need to take into account other things. Well, with regard to sources, with regard to the sources which unearthed them, the actual proceedings of the council are almost impossible to reconstruct in a reliable manner, as no stenographic record appears to have been kept, but I'll return to this a bit later. The letters surrounding the events at Nicaea are not only preserved in considered collections, but also in the works of the historians, Eusebius, Ozomenus, Socrates, Theodoret, Philostorgius, each with their own allegiances, and thus a careful examination of multiple versions of the same letter is needed. When one brings to the fore the multiplicity of languages in which these texts survive, or perhaps the lack of a comprehensive transmission, we are forced to work with a very fragmentary type of literature and from different type of sources. And for instance, a significant number of documents survive only in Syriac, in canon law collections. And an example of this is here in this Paris manuscript, which contains on 144 recto, the confession of the Antiochian Synod before Nicaea. And yeah, this has been preserved only in Syriac. On the right side, there's the starting of the letter of Constantine before the canons. So this is in itself a very complex type of portrait. So another difficulty lays in dating the letters and ascribing them to one particularly event or another. For instance, in the aftermath of Serdica, Osius and Protogenes wrote a letter to Julius of Rome, and this is preserved fragmentarily. And in order to reaffirm their fidelity to Nicaea. So thus, in a context like this, do we consider this letter as part of the Nicaea dossier or as part of the Serdica dossier and so on? So these are some of the, I suppose, limitations we would need to take into account. Perhaps just, well, for a material element, there are four papyrus fragments preserving fragments of the Nicene Creed, and this is the oldest one. So yeah, I thought that's quite an interesting thing. And that's an Oxyrhynchus papyrus from the 5th century. So now, what do we know about the procedure of recording the documents in writing or not, or the procedure about disseminating them, and how on the basis of the notations of the stenographers or the scribes was an original record produced and to be circulated, and sometimes in the form of a biblion read aloud, as Grauman shown for the later councils. So all this is rather unclear. And for Nicaea, we have the interesting testimony of the church historian Gelasius, who records that Constantine and the bishop jointly ordered a bundle of documents to be sent to all the laity and clergy. And then we also have the account from the anonymous church history, which lists the 13 bishops meant to disseminate the outcomes at Nicaea. So Gelasius says that the Holy Fathers and the most pious emperor himself, by a unanimous decision, ordered that this synodical letter and the emperor's constitutions against Arius, as well as his epistle to the Alexandrians, be sent to the entire civilized world, along with the Holy Orthodox Creed that was set forth by the Holy Fathers, and so on. So, however, as Grauman notes, these procedures tell more about the expectation of a universal dissemination of decisions than they provide proof of a concerted effort at the systematic promulgation by Constantine and the Nicene bishops. And again, the records probably never existed. Now, how these letters get from one place to the other is another topic, and the letter bearers were quite essentials in these procedures and in these sensible matters. And it has been shown that the bishops mainly recruited carriers from their own clergy, priests, deacons, and sometimes monks, depending on the availability. And it has been shown that when a letter carrier is mentioned by name, usually their rank and qualification is also specified, and this is in Caltobiano, in the first author mentioned. So what do we know about the letters carriers? Were they expected to read the letter out loud, to mediate and offer additional information on a topic, or to assist in how the message gets conveyed, or how the answer gets back to the initial sender? Were they, in a sense, representing the sender? So these questions mostly had from the second author, from Head, who Peter Head. He looks at all the letter carriers in the Oxyrhynchus. So the named, the mentioned, not named by name, but mentioned in the Oxyrhynchus collection, and gets out with this typology. So, but what do we have in the Nicene documents in this regard? So, from this first document, the letter of Arius to Eusebius of Nicomedia, well, this almost sounds as an accidental letter, depending on the availability of a bearer. So, since my father Ammonius is going to Nicomedia, then I will send you this and this. So it again, the premise sounds a little bit accidental, depending on the availability of this Ammonius, who happened to go the right way to Nicomedia. But this Ammonius, the carrier of Arius' letter, is also mentioned in Athanasius' encyclical letter. And according to Athanasius, he was the secretary of the Arian bishop, so the secretary of Gregory, elected as his substitute. So it's a rather important letter carrier. Well, in this second example, the letter issued by a council in Palestine, Arius is thought to have summoned an unnamed messengers to Paulinus, to Eusebius of Caesarea, and to Patrophilus of Scythopolis to sign his petition. And well, we can read it. Since Alexander was not willing, since Alexander was not willing to give away to the correct understanding of God, Arius sent messengers to Paulinus, bishop of Tyre, to Eusebius, who presided over the church of Caesarea, and to Patrophilus, and he solicited permission for himself and for his adherents to form the people who were with them into a church, and so on. So Arius is thought to have summoned these unnamed messengers, and it's possible that Sozomenus mentions here a situation in which Arius might have sent via a messenger the letter and some documents in a bundle, so a petition. So he wanted to be granted signature on his petition. Oops. However, complaints also occur, and we read in Sozomenus that an unnamed notary entrusted with the documents of the Nicene Council is thought to have been deceived by Eusebius of Nicomedia and Theopnis of Nicaea. And it reads that that the dispute concerning the doctrines of Arius was rekindled once more in other cities and so on. And it is said that Eusebius, bishop of Nicomedia, and Theognis, bishop of Nicaea, bribed or deceived the notary to whom the emperor had entrusted the custody of the documents of the Nicene Council, effaced their signatures and attempted openly to teach that the son is not to be considered consubstantial with the father. Later on, in Sozomenus, Constantine sends his notarius Marianus with a letter. So Marianus, an official who was a shorthand writer of the emperor, came to Tyre and delivered a letter from the emperor to the council, commanding them to repair quickly to Jerusalem in order to consecrate the temple. And of course, it's known that these notari or the tachygraphers held important roles in the state structure and sometimes were part of the opening ceremonies as imperial legate. And in this case, Marianus, this Marianus was entrusted to read aloud the letter from Constantine welcoming the bishop and setting up the agenda. Of course, the agenda established by Constantine. Well, as it has been suggested that sometimes the standing of the letter bearers could affect the outcome of the dispatch, perhaps one of the most influential letter bearer is Osius of Cordoba. And in recent and not so recent scholarship, it has been argued that he might have been not only Constantine's right hand and theological advisor, but the one who de facto convened the Council of Nicaea. I think Samuel Fernandez and also Morales wrote in this sense. What do we know about him, about Osius? So, well, Constantine's concern for unity met the dissensions in Antioch, and even though he did not seem to grasp the full implications of this theological conflict, Osius might have. Theodotus, Eusebius of Caesarea, and Narcissus of Neronias have been put under scrutiny at the Council of Antioch. And it's mentioned here that they appeared together and brought forward ideas contrary to those expressed here. And then the synodal letter of Antioch attests that the bishops were planning a magnificent and sacred synod to be held at Ancyra, and we read it in the last in paragraph 15. So in the copy of a letter written by the synod, which assembled at Antioch, which we have here, sent to Alexander, bishop of Constantinople, Osius heads the list of the bishops present, and then with Eustathios II. And that's actually quite interesting. And then we read, so that you might know of this, we write to you so that you too can be on guard against having fellowship with these men, and that you may not write to them or receive letters of fellowship from them, and so on. And then the announcement about the magnificent and sacred synod to be held at Ancyra. Now, how does this look in the historians? So Eusebius avoids mentioning Osius' name altogether. And what we have here is, of course, a mention about the letter carrier reverential standing, or so when we heard, and I'm reading from here, when we heard about this, the emperor was cut to be quick and took the matter as a personal calamity. He dispatched one of the godly men of his court, one whom he knew well to be of proven moderation of life and virtue, a man very famous for his religious confessions, as a mediator to reconcile the disputations in Alexandria, and so on. So then Eusebius marshals towards giving Constantine full agency in summoning the council, and even concocts, and that's actually quite interesting, an etymological motivation for the choice of Nicaea for obtaining the desired victory. And Osius is referred to in passing, and only at the end of the list of churches represented. So we have here, as you can see, from all the churches filled from Europe, Libya, Asia, and so on, and then Syrians, Phoenicians, and so on. And then at the end, and even of the Spaniards, the very famous one was among those joining the assembly with all the rest. Now, if Eusebius decides to omit Ossius' name altogether, the situation is a little bit different with Socrates and Sozomenus, and they are mentioning Ossius' name. For Socrates, so he mentioned that when the emperor was made acquainted with these disorders, he sent a letter to Alexander and Arius by a trustworthy person named Ossius, who was a bishop in Cordoba. And the emperor greatly loved this man and held him in the highest estimation. And then follows a portion of this letter. And then also, of course, he mentioned that he convoked the General Council, summoning the bishops by letter to meet him at Nicaea. In the words of Sozomenus, Ossius was again, the emperor sent one who was honored for his faith, his virtual life, and most approved in those former times for his confessions about this doctrine, to reconcile those who divided on account of doctrine in Egypt, and those who in this differed about the Passover and so on. So, and then he names the messenger as being Ossius. So this man was Ossius, bishop of Cordoba. So, as Fernandez notes, Sozomenus is the only one to indicate here a causal detail. So it was only when, and this is the last paragraph, it was only when the emperor found out about the failure of Ossius' mission that he convened the council. So this is quite interesting. Now, the last two historians I will mentioning Ossius as a messenger, as a letter carrier, so as a, are Theodoret and Philostorgius. One of them, so Philostorgius mentions Ossius by name. So even before the Council of Nicaea, Alexander went to Nicomedia, met there with Ossius of Cordoba and the bishops with him, and arranged that the son should be acknowledged as consubstantial to the father by conciliar decree. And then Theodoret, on the other hand, he only mentions him as a messenger, renowned for his wit, and he was dispatched with letters in the endeavor to extinguish the dispute, but again, not mentioned with a name. So, as an aside, summoning the council via letters, and this procedure of summoning the council via letters had reverberations beyond the Greek word, and it's interesting to read the account of an Armenian and the Syriac authors of Moses Korenatis and Bar Hebraius on this. So first of all, from the Armenian side, we have we have of course Constantine, who commanded that the council of many bishops should take place at Nicaea. There gathered Victor and Vincent, priests from the city of Rome, and so on, and the bishops Alexander of Alexandria, Eustathius of Antioch, Macarius of Jerusalem, and Alexander of Constantinople. But now the insertion of the Armenian history gets into it, and it's interesting because according to Moses Korenati, then arrived an edict of the Emperor Constantine to our king Tradat, that taking Saint Gregory, so this is Gregory the Illuminator, he should go to the council, when both refuse, one for political reasons and Saint Gregory because he wanted a bit more fame from the side of the council and to be recognized as confessor. So they refused, but they sent in their place Aristarchus, who was the son of Gregory. And this is the interesting part. So he sent Aristarchus with a copy of the True Confession of Faith, signed by them both. So he acted as a sort of messenger and took a signed confessions from these two. So according to Bar Hebraeus, so from the Syriac Chronicle, so the ecclesiastical chronicle, in the time of Eustathius, this Alexander of Alexandria convened a synod and deposed Arius. He wrote to every region to spread the news, but has been unable to wipe out the poison of the vomit of Arius. And the victorious Emperor Constantine, so it's a very glorified type of record, seeing that the evil was growing, ordered all the bishops in every part to assemble at Nicaea. And then there are a lot of participants. The most distinguished were Osius and Alexander of Alexandria. And then we see here the local inserts, and then we have Jacob of Nisibis and his disciple Mar Ephraim, and Eustathius of Antioch, and Gregory the Partian, who actually is Gregory the Illuminator. So we see here a discrepancy between the Armenian and the Syriac source about the participation of Gregory. So I want to briefly go to two other matters: the aspect of public or the public or private aspect of letters, and then also the aspects of them being meant for a community and hence being meant to be read aloud. So in the first example, Constantine writes to the Church of Antioch and to Eusebius in private, who refuses to become Bishop of Antioch. So we have here a very interesting letter in which both the public and the private nature of reading is emphasized. So the emperor wrote to the people of the Church of Antioch concerning like-mindedness and told them that they ought not to desire the bishop of other regions. And then he also writes in private to Eusebius, who refused the bishopric. As to the aspect of public reading, so the first letter from Sozomenus is preserved also in the Apologia contra Arianus, and the investigation of this event was entrusted to the censor Dalmatius, the half-brother of Constantine. So this censor acted here as both a letter carrier, so he took the letter to Athanasius, but also as a mediator. So I will read only the important part. So such was the strain of the emperor's letters to Athanasius, and he further commanded that it should be read aloud before the public in order that they might all be acquainted with his intentions, and so on. And then in the Apologia, and finally, I will add that I wish that this letter to be read frequently by your wisdom in public, that it may thereby come to the knowledge of all men, and especially reach the ears of those who thus act and thus raise disturbances. And if they excite any further commotion of this kind, I will myself in person take connaissance of the matter, and so on. So now for a couple of material examples. This is a letter dated paleographically to the first half of the 4th century, and this is the one I mentioned to Bishop Theodotus. So this is very fragmentary, but again, if this is correct, this is the only testimony we have of a letter. So this is not a letter of Bishop Theodosius, but this is a letter with instructions to deliver another letter which is now lost. So yeah. So in a sense, it's the letter which functioned as a sort of oral explanations for the other one. And these are two examples. One is a personal letter from a son in Rome to his mother in Caranis, and on the recto, so on the left side here, we see the text of the letter, and on the verso, the destination. So what I wanted to show here is the fact that it really looks folded and with the instructions for delivery on the outside. So this is how letters really looked on their way out, in a sense. So, and things were not very different with official letters, and this is a letter from the prices of August Amnica, again addressed to two prominent persons in Oxyrhynchus, and we see again here on the right side the mentions about the address. And here is a simulation of folding a letter. Yeah. So thus, the letters can be shorter or longer alone or in bundles and travel folded with the relevant information on the outside. Now, since the 4th century, church officials became extensive users of the cursus publicus, and it's well known that Constantine granted them privileges to use this public service during the councils and other official gatherings. And we have examples from the Synod of Arles that the African bishops received permissions to use these carriages and also received food supplies. So the same happened at Nicaea, and the number of bishops was rather large. So again, there's a debate on this, but counting also the people who traveled with the bishops, like clergy and servants and stuff like this, AIEP-IAPS gets to about 1,500 participants, which is actually quite a lot. And there were historians complaining that this put quite some pressure on the system itself, so on the transport system itself. So both letters and people and goods traveled, used this service. And this is just a simulation from the Stanford Geospatial Network website about a travel from Alexandria to Nicaea. And it, if one takes this fast carriage, which was provided by Cursus Publicus, it took around 15 days or 16. And you can also see here the price for that. So yeah, to conclude, letters were therefore a very successful genre and continue to be rather influential for the shaping of an early Nicene memory and theology. And it's no surprise that a significant number of these documents are in epistolary form. And this is also shown by the mediated theological direction these letters show, and by the absence, and sometimes really complete absence, of documents pertaining to the opposing party. Thank you very much. I think I finished.
Yeah, thank you very much, Madalina, for this rich presentation and the visualization of upfolding the letter, especially. And I think there are several questions. Please, who would like to ask a question? Yes, please. So, Jung-Yong, please, just turn on your micro.
Oh yes, thank you so very much for such an interesting presentation on the the role of letter writing on the Nicene memory as a whole. Something that I'm curious about is what you view as the language of friendship in all of this. You mentioned in one of the letters quoted, I think it was by I have it by Socrates, the historian. Osius, Bishop of Cordova in Spain, the emperor greatly loved this man and held him in the highest estimation. And then you mentioned his role as a letter carrier, and of course the very famous role as the president of the council in Nicaea. I wonder what you view as the role of Osius as representing the presence of the emperor or mediating the presence. Is the friendship a crucial sort of tool that's used in order to convey the presence? And I wonder how you would tie this with earlier, more classical forms of epistolary theory as well.
Well, thank you very much. That's a very interesting question. So I think there has been research on the friendship formula in these epistolary works. And I think that what you noticed in Sozomenos is only an example of that. And we have a lot of this. So even Eusebius, when mentioning Osius, said that he was a godly man of court and he was of moderation and high virtue and stuff like this. So I think that this is quite a, but as to the role of, there's a passage on friendship in the formulaic terminology of letters in Pauline, Allen, and Bronn Neal in the Greek and Latin letters in late antiquity. There is a section on the language of friendship in this. As to Osius, I think there are more people in the room who know more than I do. But so from what I could see from the letters is that he really was meant to represent Constantine in the Council of Antioch. And I think that initially Constantine really hoped that he would solve the matter in a peaceful way, and he didn't really foresee what was going to happen next. I think only when the things unraveled, then, and with his return with a rather negative outcome, or I don't know, an outcome which was not the peace, the unanimous sort of appeasement of the problems in the province, that Constantine probably grasped the situation. But I think there are also scholars who argue that it was actually Osius who grasped the really sensitive issue there, and he was de facto the one who convened the council, even if, of course, all the historians mention quite a lot, and there are really very large descriptions in Constantine, in De Vita Constantini, and also in Eusebius De Vita Constantini, and also in the other historians about Constantine being of such an important memory to this. But yeah.
I have a question. Sorry, I have a question. Do you believe that Osius represented the Pope? Was it important to have the Pope at the council? Which was the ecclesiology according to you at that time? Thanks.
Well, I'm not sure. So if I think the matter was not about the Pope being present or not, but I think it was more of it was more prompted, but what had happened in this pre-Nicene council in Antioch. So I don't think that was on the table, but again, probably other people would be,
Matthias Simple, have you raised your hand and put it down, or?
Well, so that putting down was a mistake.
Okay, yeah.
but I wanted to ask another question. But regarding the Pope, what I think you mentioned it in one of the Armenian citations, there was Osius of Rome, so the both positions combined, and I think that is a later development.
So you mean that he was considered as a representative of the Western?
In that Armenian source, not in his time. Yeah.
Exactly. So Moses Korenatis, yes, he mentioned Osius of Rome. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, but follow up with your question, please.
Okay, thank you. It's only a detail, but I find that quite interesting. In the quotation of, I hope I have noted the name correctly, Moses Korenatsi, the Armenian one, the translator added he sent a confession of faith with his signatures. The translator added a copy of, and that I find quite interesting because it lets us think if original documents were sent with letters. And do you have any examples for that you did not have in attachment only a copy of something, but the original itself, even if there was the danger of being lost or destroyed or something like that?
Yeah, that's actually quite interesting. So I would suppose I would need to check this again. So but my initial guess would be that so it is a copy of the true confession signed by them both, because the original probably remained as a with Gregory and with the King Tradat. So I suppose then so this certified copy by this very certified messenger function, I mean, was as good as the original when the original was lacking. But I suppose it might be quite a common preservation of material, and about the dissemination that you also keep in your own archive, the document.
Thank
because
you.
Also, when we have examples from Constantine sending the same letter to 3 different churches, only changing the title, or depending to whom the letter is addressed. It's still the same letter and it doesn't have a different value, but it needs to be somehow disseminated. But that's an interesting point. And I suppose it also testifies to Korenati, historical type of thinking.
Thank you.
Yeah. Holger, please.
Yes, thank you very much for your wonderful paper. I've got one question. You said you cited Socrates, I think, after Osius' failure, then the king, as I said, the emperor convened the Council of Nicaea. But if my one question is, if there was really this Council of Antioch, you may know, and we have discussed about it later, that is, I think, is not really genuine. Where was the failure then? Because within the eve of Nicaea, there would have been this big council. Most of the bishops that were at Nicaea later on were there. Eusebius was damned. Arius was damned. Why was there still the need for Nicaea?
Well, I suppose so. I think what people argued is mostly a question. So first of all, I think it was a question of rhetorics. I think that Constantine downplaying so for a long time he mentioned that this is an unimportant matter, and then when it suddenly became an important matter, I think that it was perceived that Osius was the one who changed this rhetoric. And on the other hand, why the thing didn't happen there, I mean, in 3 to 4 or early 3 to 5, I suppose that perhaps Osius didn't want to assume things by himself, but again, I don't know, probably. So this would be my guess, but again, I know that there's a lot of debate on this.
Thank you.
Yeah. In the chat, Elia Scapini, please turn on your micro just and ask a question, please.
Yeah, I just would like to react to this question because it's everybody's on that right now. So my observation is that there's another possibility, okay, and we could say that Osio did not convene the Council of Nicaea, and we could say that he was sent to Alexandria to fix the problems. And at the moment he was sent with the invitation for the 20 years of reign of Constantine. That's another point of view, and according to me, it's quite confirmed from the letter of Antioch, and the very contribution of that letter is that it doesn't really say that Osius convenes. Osius speaks of that of Antioch, just something which is in the air. With it, reading that letter seems like everybody knew what was going to happen in Ancira, okay, but then Constantine moved it, but it's not said, it's not proved that Osius convened. According to me, we still lack many evidences to prove that, and seems more likely, according to me, that Constantine hoped to fix the various problems, okay, and to celebrate the 20 years of his reign. And okay, so the problem wasn't fixed, and they added also the Arian controversy to the agenda of Nicaea. That's my point of view, and yeah.
Yeah. Please, Matthias, you give in here.
Yeah, I want to add 2 points. First, I think it is not sure that Osius was the one who went to Alexandria with that letter, but I will talk about that later, so we can discuss it maybe later too. But what I wanted to say is I find the point Holger Strutwolf made very interesting. Why do they need the Council of Nicaea after these condemnations? And I think one might understand it under two points. The first one is the condemnations in Alexandria of Arius, and then if Antioch 324 is genuine, of Eusebius and so on. If they were condemned, it was not effective because Arius could well travel in the most part of the Eastern Empire and the most parts of the Eastern Empire, and Eusebius, for example, had still the support of his local church, as demonstrated by his own letter after Nicaea, where it does not say, well, hurrah, I am justified, but he has to defend himself against falsifying the faith of his local church. And the point we should think about, in my opinion, is who really convened the Council of Nicaea, or better, the planned Synod of Ankara, which we know was planned before, and then Constantine decided to bring it to Nicaea for several reasons. And if we think it was, and I want to make a point about that later, if we think it was the anti-Arian alliance who tried to have a general council or something like that, a big council, a great council at Ankara with Macellus as bishop, to get these condemnations finally effective, then maybe things will be put in another light, but that's only an idea we can discuss.
Yeah, I suppose that would be possible. I think there are also some other sources which mentioned Alexandros of Alexandria as being the conveners. So I suppose there are very different possibilities.
May I come back to your general report about the letters. And while you are presenting all the material, I asked myself, there are then these letters which demand that you do not receive letters from the opponents.
Mhm.
And so how is this actually put into practice, not to receive a letter and document that you have not received this letter? How could I imagine is this happening? Have you sent it back and just said, I send it back and do not open your letter? Or, well, we all know that receiving a letter is an expression of a community. So it's something like an in-group and out-group, but what does this actually mean, not receive this letter? Well, I can refuse to get into contact with the letter bearer. Or is this then the decisive point? Or, of course, I can close my door, just so to say. Yeah, I do not welcome somebody. But how is it documented that I do not receive this letter?
Well, that's interesting. So I suppose that practically I can't see receiving a letter, especially, I mean, after when we saw that, it takes some 15, 20 days for the letter to get there, and then, being quite an important thing, and then just deciding not to read it. So, I suppose it just underlines the idea of trying to establish alliances and sort of allegiances and enemies and foes. And so I suppose that it's more about a cautionary tale in a sense. So it's more of a, pay attention not to listen too much to this party or another, or simply not to answer exactly. So I don't imagine people not reading them. I would rather imagine just not engaging with them. But I suppose, we don't have evidence in this regard, so that's rather interesting. It would have been interesting to find a letter in which somebody says, well, I received a letter, but I decided not to read it. So, and again, the letter comes, and especially in this context, a lot of the time with a messenger who already conveys, the message, or as I suppose the details. So I think the mediation is already done at the first level when handling down the piece of papyrus.
Yeah. So in a way, this is also who comes first. So if I'm not involved in the matter, I have to get some information. And so which letter I get first, I'm informed by this letter, so to say. And so if I do not receive the letter or read it, I am not knowing what's going on. So, but
it is also an interesting way of seeing it. But I suppose that also this encyclical and also I suppose there were letters meant to really be read aloud. So I suppose that the people concerned. So I suppose that these are not necessarily so all these letters are rather sent to bishops and to the people responsible for the churches rather to the general public. So I think that, they needed to read them and they needed to, sort of engage.
Yeah, Holger, please. Before we make,
I can also think of maybe a little bit fantasy, but I think I could think of if you said that someone has to be allowed to go to the bishop before there were some people who say you can go or cannot. But if you know, for example, don't let them come to me. Oh, if someone of Arius is condemned, or say Eusebius would be condemned, And then I know it, and then someone comes in and says, I'm coming from Eusebius. There might be the possibility, so I have no communication with them. That might be also a possibility. That you say this letter will not be read aloud, it will not be accepted, although the person comes, but I know already who's coming and why he is coming. Maybe that's maybe a solution for the question. I think it's only speculative, but I think maybe a possibility.
Yeah.
So, yes, please. A last question before we make a short break. And yeah.
Or perhaps I was just going to add that perhaps Osseous has a special role insofar as there's an imperial hand behind, and so he's the type of person whose letter you can't refuse in a certain sense, even if you're of a different faction. And the fact that he has an odd mediatory role in that he represents the emperor, but then also has a kind of agency of his own, a substantive agency as a bishop, also from the West, having this weird in-between agency, if you like, ostensibly not a representative of Rome per se, I think is clear from the I mean, even in the conciliar decrees, the presbyters of Rome signed for Sylvester, so not being quite that either, but this weird mediatory role in which he can negotiate his own agency whilst also representing the imperial hand seems to be an interesting interplay.
Mm.